Hello and welcome to my interview with the Orpheon.
Hello, everybody. My name is Albert from The Orpheon, or you may just know me as Orpheon. I am a content creator who makes silly Metroid videos that usually talk about the lore of the games or the gameplay mechanics and the different characters. And I am a pretty big fan of the series since I was a kid. Um, and I also enjoy making my own silly original stories, talking and playing some other games like Monster Hunter or Final Fantasy 14 or the Nier franchise. And I'm a pretty big fan of birds.
So I
Wow.
guess let's get into the questions. The first one being, what was the build-up like for Other M? Do you remember seeing lots of advertisements, news articles, that kind of stuff for it, or was it very slim where you were?
Well, actually, I want to say that Metroid Other M was pretty well advertised. I would say that if my memory, if it serves correctly, there was a decent amount of advertisement for Metroid Dread leading up to its release. There was a lot of Nintendo, promotional videos. It was in the front cover of a Nintendo Power magazine leading up to its release. There were several trailers and TV ads, and not to mention they really went all out with that live action commercial cinematic with Samus walking past key moments from her past. That to this day still one of my favorite Metric commercials. But it was a pretty well advertised the game. To give Nintendo credit, they really went all out into try and promote this game because not necessarily I saw giant billboards about it in my area or like you saw with Metroid Dread recently, but there was definitely a lot of more promotional material that Nintendo would normally do for their games back in those days, or at least matching the same level of something like Skyward Sword or Mario Galaxy around it.
Right.
But the build up for Other M was quite interesting because I remember that people were excited for it because of the premise and all this other stuff, but it was just a sheer confusion or curiosity, I should say, more about the gameplay focus and how would it play out and all this other stuff. But in terms of advertisement, I saw it advertised pretty well all over the place. And given that it was coming, right after Prime 3, a few years later after Prime 3, I'd say that although maybe not matching the same level of hype as when Dread was announced and coming out, there was a considerable amount of excitement giving Metroid's more obscure, if you may, in quotations, popularity compared to say something like Zelda or Mario.
Yeah, yeah. Because yeah, I remember like looking into the like researching like advertisement and like yeah, that live action commercial is really well done. It's like holy.
Yeah, it's really well made. And I think for me it was really sort of memorable seeing that commercial because the first time I saw that commercial I was actually at a movie theater.
Oh yeah, yeah. I
So
think I remember them. Yeah, doing research, them saying that they showed it in some movie theaters. That's actually really cool.
yeah, I got to see it firsthand blind in a movie theater. And I that was such a highlight for me that I don't even remember the movie I went to watch anymore. And the entire thing that was sitting in the back of my mind was that pretty cool live action Metroid trailer. That to this day I still think it holds up pretty well, and it's very cinematic and very artistic. And I felt that it was kind of perfect in trying to encapsulate what the game was going to be about and what was sort of the main motif that players should expect going into it. So that's why I felt that it was probably one of the best commercials. If anything, it made me wish that Metroid Dread got something similar with the Emmys and whatever to build up that mystery or something. But that's a different topic.
Yeah, yeah. I guess answering the second question, it's like you were probably quite excited for Other M going with the build up to release.
Yeah, I mean, Metroid fan, new Metroid game. How was I? It was hard not to get excited for Metroid Other M And I will say, because although there was a confusion about the gameplay, it was also that same confusion that made fans sort of excited about the game itself to see what it was going to be like and how it was going to play. And then the stories, because although the reveal trailer to this day, I still think it's kind of a mess because it shows a lot of everything, but you don't really get an idea. I was still excited because I knew that it was going to take part in telling Samus's backstory. And the Metroid manga was out, and most Metroid fans had access to it thanks to Metroid Database and all this other stuff. But it's not quite the same because it never came out outside of Japan, so it was easy to get excited about Other M when they were selling you with a premise that it's supposed to be a retelling of Samus's backstory and taking in a new approach where could expect to see some key things from the manga. I wasn't expecting like a one-to-one translation of it, but more like the opportunity to modernize it, maybe change a few things here and there, maybe expand on some other areas to give a new canon backstory to Samus in the Metroid universe, while at the same time making it easily available for everyone around the world. So it seemed like the perfect opportunity to just grab the story of the manga and not necessarily, go beat by beat with it, but simply have the opportunity to witness Samus's backstory. So there was definitely a lot to get excited about. And as a Metroid fan, I can't think of reasons why, back in the day, I wouldn't be excited for Metroid Other M.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. That, yeah, that checks out. Like, yeah, I'd probably be in the same boat if
Yeah,
if I knew what Metroid was and like,
yeah, it's the fact that I knew the manga, I read it and all this other stuff, and then the promotional material leaned in onto the whole aspect about Samus's backstory, which from the Nintendo franchises, it's Metroid. It matters more for Metroid because it's sort of like a more of a linear story with each installment being a new chapter. So being able to get that sort of chapter zero, even though we have zero mission, or I guess chapter -1, was pretty exciting.
Metroid -1 win. Were your expectations for Other M quite high, or were you trying to be subjective, like meld their expectations?
Well, I always have like two perspectives, or I like to say that I have like two personas, and there's two different types of being excitement. The Metroid fan of me was just super excited, super stoked. Like I will be by default when a new Metroid game gets announced and revealed or whatever. Even in some regard with Federation Force,
Hmm.
even though I was a little bit disappointed when of its reveal, I was still excited because more Metroid, more universe, and all this other stuff, more world building. But
The series isn't dead. Like it's
yeah, I mean they're still like interested in doing stuff with it, but that's a different topic. But and then the other persona in me is more the actual just like um I like to refer to them as the critic, even though it's not much more of a critic and more like my opinion. So I always like to save those expectations and not get them too high. So that's like the more I guess objective approach about playing the game, seeing how I feel about it, and all this other stuff. And in that regard, I was sort of in a middle point because although I was excited, it's a new Metroid game and it's trying to take a new approach. So like there was reason to get excited because it was taking a new approach to gameplay, which
yeah.
Metroid Prime 3 had just finished the trilogy, and Zero Mission came out a few years ago and all this other stuff. So this didn't really sat between the 2D crowd or the Prime crowd. It was trying to do its own thing, and for that reason, it was a lot to get excited about, especially when it seemed that they were trying to capture that energy of the 2D game's gameplay in a 3D space,
Hmm.
which could almost kind of be close to maybe what Metroid could have been like in the Nintendo 64 if it could run it, or a third person shooter and all this other stuff. But at the same time, it was just like these plethora of gameplay mechanics, swapping between the first person and the third person, the three different studios working on one game, and all these other things that made me a little bit cautious about the end result as it could be, and the same as with like controlling it on a Wiimote. So I'd say that I was able to, like, with playing any game, I try to go with it in a sort of medium mindset, down in the middle, so that way if I'm having fun, if it, if it's sort of like a meter. If it goes up, I know I'm having fun and I can probably think of why, and if it's going down, then I know I'm being bored and I can probably also tell why.
Ah, I see, I see. When you first played the game, did you know of its reception, or was it like kind of going in blind, you didn't know other people's opinions of it?
So, so like even when Metroid Dread came out, I try to stay as neutral as I can, even though anybody who goes watch the backlog of my blind playthrough can attest I was
Okay,
a
yeah.
little bit too excited. Hmm. Well, I'd say I went fully blind into it because I got the game day one.
Mhm.
I pre-ordered it at a GameStop, and then August 31st, after like a month or so delay, I went up and I picked it up after some classes at the
Right.
time, and then I went back home and I played it. And usually, and usually back in those days, it wasn't quite like today where you had like all these social media platforms, and you get spoiled, and or hear reception, or Nintendo wasn't giving out as many early copies to be a positive or negative. Then I went to looked the general consensus online, and it was mixed. It was still mixed, but I'd say it was leaning more towards the positive than the negative. By compared by today's standards, or what you tend to see more from the community, at least today. And what I can remember, it was still, the mixed feelings came from both, Samus's depiction, which is the same as today, and the gameplay side of things with, not reaching its full potential. But I think people were more or less optimistic about it because it showed promise. The formula showed promise. It just needed a little bit more ironing out before it could reach that potential. Like it's almost like if we had another Metroid Prime that came before the original one that was kind of like halfway there,
Yeah.
and then Prime polished it. So yeah, I'd say that reception was still mixed, even bad in that back in that day, but it was still more favorable to the game because it was in the end still a fun, unique experience for the Metroid series that wasn't afraid of trying some new things, rather than playing it safe and doing yet another Metroid Prime style of game or another 2D game. I feel that people back in the day were more open to the idea or the fact that Nintendo was willing to take a risk and try and do something different with Metroid after concluding a trilogy and the 2D series and stuff like that.
Yeah, I feel the same way, I guess, with Prime's. I'm not the other M's, like how
Yeah.
take on the formula. Like, it's not a bad like formula. It just needs some more.
Work.
Yeah, absolutely. It's
Simple as that.
yeah. What do you think of the premise of the game? Like, how did you feel about its depiction of Samus's backstory and it taking place between Metro, Super Metroid, and Fusion?
Well, with the premise, like this is a little bit of a big question, so I'm gonna try and break it down into chunks so that it's easy for me.
Hmm.
In terms of the premise as a whole, and this is more or less seeing it not just by the full picture and all that other stuff, but what is it trying to do. I was quite intrigued by the premise of the game, and I kind of enjoyed it. And by that I mean, the mysteries lurking within the bottle ship.
Yeah,
The whole Sam is arriving into this derelict vessel and going from having no information about what's going on to slowly unraveling the things that went on the bottle ship was kind of intriguing because it's like a different take of Metroid Fusion, I would say. But in Metroid Fusion, you kind of knew the crisis from the get-go, and then there was really not much more mystery until you reach the restricted area in that's connected to Sector 6. So in here it was kind of fun because you never really quite sure what happened. And another thing I always sort of enjoyed about the game is that it really attempted at giving you multiple story elements that would be that's going on at the same time. So you had the mysterious creature, little birdie, the finding out who Melissa is, what's the purpose of the bottle ship, who is the leader and why they were sent, and all this other stuff, and whether or not they actually fulfilled in delivering a satisfying narrative aside. I could always enjoy this because I felt like having all these story elements made up for the fact that the game was linear. Because although the gameplay and the exploration was rather linear, you really never were quite sure what was going to be the next threat or the next mystery that Samus would intercept, and that really kind of kept you on your toes, rather than say something like Metroid Prime 3 that, like, all right, you took down Brio Elysia, so now it's Brio's seed, so now it's the Elysia seed story arc and stuff like that. So, or kind of like the Agon Waste arc and then the Torvos Bog arc. This felt like more of a interconnected story that attempted to have several layers and stuff like that. Whether or not it fulfilled them, like I said, I think it's open to interpretation by different people. Even though, in my opinion, I don't think it was at its best, but I could at least give it credit for that. In terms of Samus's backstory being depicted, I don't mind what they tried to do with having a sort of story in the present that gives Samus the opportunity to recall the past and sort of use that as the excuse to be the surrogate reason for why the player gets to see this piece of information now. My main complaint is that, we didn't really get to see Samus's backstory. And that's honestly the most disappointing thing about Other M for me, is that the entire marketing campaign, again, that commercial we saw and the Sakamoto developer diaries that came out, really seemed that we were going to get Samus's backstory. And aside from she used to work with Adam as a part of the Galactic Federation and she left, we didn't really get anything else. And that's what I was disappointing about this, especially because we didn't get a chance to see, the Chozo and all this other stuff, which is, might be argue, the most important part of Samus's past and her becoming the person that she is, aside with the Federation and stuff like that. So it was rather disappointing that we didn't really get to see any of that expanded. It almost feels like at a one point in the story early on, it just gets sort of brushed under the rug, and then it just focuses on the events in the present and stuff like that. So I've always felt a little bit disappointed and sour about that, sadly, because Samus's backstory was the whole point of Metroid Other M, if you may. And so when people are, criticizing the story, my usual problem is simply that they marketed a Samus backstory experience, and we just didn't really get it, if you think about it. In terms of it taking place in Fusion and Super, I was always, no pun intended, super confused about it. I guess they wanted to fuse some ideas and stuff like that. But I always felt weird because I can understand trying to put it in between games, but it's just that the timing feels a little bit forced in my mind, or in my opinion, about where it should take place between Super and Fusion. I feel that the easy way out was just making a whole prequel game where it takes place before Zero Mission, and it's just a young Samus focus and all this other stuff. But I guess I can't really think on top of my head why they would want to place it after Super and Fusion, except for, Adam Malkovich is still, there's a reason for Adam Malkovich to still be alive and to show his death. Which, plays a very important focus in Metroid Fusion. But I feel that, if this game was even a prequel before Zero Mission, and that's where an atom dies, or at any almost any other point, you could still have fusion still retain its own impact and stuff like that. So in my mind, I always seen Other M as a side story game. Um, so I'm not really bothered too much by its placement in the timeline, because if it weren't for the fact that Adam is still alive, so it's gotta be before Super, but Mother Brain is dead, so sorry, Adam is still alive, so it's gotta be before Fusion, and then Mother Brain is dead, so it's gotta be after Super. That it's the whole reason why it's in that spot, but it could really be almost anywhere, because you could still be that Mother Brain is dead, but it's after the original Metroid
Yeah.
game.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that. It's like, well, they could have placed it like after
Yeah.
between 1 and 2, but
I mean, Super Metroid could be seen as a remake of the original Metroid game when you really think about it.
yeah, that's true.
So, yeah, I mean, the story, the premise is intriguing. I wouldn't say it's the best. I wouldn't call it, a reason to play the game, but it's at least serviceable in attempting at keeping you guessing and keeping you on your toes, which I felt was rather intriguing. I just wish we had, for considering how lengthy some of the cutscenes can be, that we got a chance to see more of Samus's backstory, or key moments that she might recall to.
Yeah, like the death of like really killing her mother, like that would have been a very important moment to have.
Yeah, I mean, it's even then. I would say that it's not just like, oh, really killing your mother, because like as I mentioned, they might change some things for, um, like I was going at it expecting that they were going to change some stuff, or in some fashions here and there. But it wasn't, for me. It wasn't so much the really killing your parents, because I really think, or expecting to see K2L Colony as a whole. But I was hoping to see more of Sevis, more of Samus in the times in the Federation, because even through that you can squeeze in a mention of Ridley killing their parents, and that's an excuse to do a cutaway to it rather than dedicate an entire scene, just for the sake of keeping a narrative focus, where the more important part of Samus's life is not just her parents dying, but more the person she becomes because of it. And she becomes that person is on Sevis and with the Federation, not necessarily when she's a toddler and gets her parents murdered. It's kind of like Batman in that regard. It's not about his parents dying, but what he does after that fact.
What do you think of Sam's design with and without the very soonest game? Do you like it, dislike it?
All right. This is a very easy question for me, because it's a question I've been asked a while, and it's a question by my friends over the years, and it's a question that I've always come back to. But I'll essentially break it down into Armored and Zero suits. Varia suit, I love it, masterpiece. I don't care what people tell me. I'm talking. It's a great blend between the bulkiness of the original art, and that bulk is part of Samus's identity with the upper body, but then the lower body is very athletic and very slim, so all the acrobatics that she does, especially in the game, are believable. So I love that. One of the things I always praised Other M about, that I think not many people really talk about, is that it nailed at bringing that original Metroid art style into 3D space, where it feels still like that cheesy, 80s aliens designs and stuff like that, but it's still creepy and memorable and all this other stuff. So it's pretty cool at how the Other M armor managed to be both bulky and sleek at the same time. So it's got some of my favorite renders and poses from Samus, especially there's this one where that's the Smash Ultimate pose for the character select screen, which is taken from a render of her being back to back with Anthony. Just showed to me, yeah, it just showed to me that this armor feels Metroid. Like when I saw Samus twirling, and I can see Samus twirling and doing all those 1,000 somersault speed boost, Olympics twists and turns in that armor, but I can also see the sort of overwhelming force and strength and resilience that she has from the Prime series. So I always really was a fan of it. And I can also say that, I like the idea with a visor where you can sort of see her mouth. It makes sense to have her mouth be visible, given that it's a game where she's, talking a lot more than the other games. But it's still cool how, thanks to the armor design and the helmet design, they can still get away with hiding her mouth
Mm-hmm.
by just putting the camera and the armor in specific angles to kind of get that mysterious angle to Samus. And so I feel like for that they nailed it. The power suit colors are atrocious. I hate it. There's no defending it. And I don't really count the gravity suit because it's not really there.
It's a gravity feature. It's not
But
a suit.
yeah, I see it in the same vein as, say, the gravity boost in Echoes, if you may,
Right, right, right.
where it's just, or the hazard suit, but arguably way less because it's just a purple aura and whatever. But I really love the armor. I never quite understood the hate for it. Like, sure, Metroid Prime 2 Varia Suit Samus will always be my favorite, because that's my favorite game. But the Other M armor is a very, very much close second, especially with the tweaks they made for it in Smash Brothers with all those more black panels and or panel lining and definition was really, really good. In terms of Zero Zoot, I'm just gonna address the elephant in the room straight on. Remove the absurd proportions that are on the character, the Team Ninja, if you may, and the ridiculous heels. But the rest, I really love it.
Uh-huh.
Um, I really liked more the take on the two different color schemes rather than it just being cyan broken down with some panel lines and Zero Mission. The main thing I liked from the Zero Mission that I wish was in the Other M Zero Suit as itself was the sort of dark gray strands on her arms and her legs. Those were pretty cool at breaking up the model, and obviously the regular heels on her shoes. But I feel that the darker blue works better at creating that sort of breakup from her Zero Zoot cyan, and also make it a little bit cleaner to look and all this other stuff. I am also a big fan of Samus's sort of like hairstyle in the game, where it's still like the Zero Mission classic Zero Zoot Samus hairstyle, but it's a little bit more in terms of a realistic proportion. And I really, this might sound like a minor thing, but I'm a very big fan of that like one hair strand that she's got going on between her eyes, and it might be a me thing because I'm a sucker for that in character designs and stuff like that. But I really think that the Other M Zero Zoot really just gets some slack because of the proportions, because of the heels, because of the game that it comes from. But I feel that they managed to make a look that still feels like Samus, maybe a little bit more prettier, if you may. But essentially, you can tell that it worked, and they kept going with it because of the depictions we got later on Metroid Samus Returns and Dread. With it's still the Other M Zero Suit, but now they addressed the issues we had, where they changed Samus's proportions to feel more like the build that she would actually have.
Yeah.
And they changed the shoes, and they added more of those stuff. So in a way, I'm very happy that we got the Other M because it got us to that point. If anything, I feel that like back several years ago, Max Factory released a Zero Suit Samus statue
Oh.
that from Other M, which if I feel that if those were the proportions, and and the look was closer to the one of that statue, that maybe it would have received a better audience reception back in the day. Sure, it still has the ridiculous heels, but I think that the proportions and the face sculpt look much nicer than what it is in the game, and it feels like a nice blend between that anime art style and that more realistic look. I also liked the detail of having a holster for the paralyzer because it just makes more sense in a practical feature. I don't know. I personally would have preferred she held it on a belt, sort of like a tilted belt, because
Oh yeah.
I'm just a sucker for that. But I don't really mind it being on the thigh, sort of like a almost cowboyish or military look. With Yeah, and on top of that, I also really like the that one cutscene with Ian Malkovich where young Samus has some more gear over the Zero Suit. I also thought that was a pretty cool idea.
I like that too. That
Uh,
was a actually
yeah.
that's actually really
I I, I kind of wish more people drew that version of the Zero Suit or that gear, or people cosplayed it with it, because it's pretty cool. It adds some extra layers to her and all this other stuff. And before people go and saying, well, how are those things gonna enter the Varia suit, blah blah. I mean, we're talking about a jumpsuit that can materialize armor that's made by space bird people. Suspension of disbelief.
yeah. Yeah. To me, I don't know. I I think when it comes to like having the balance between a bulk look and like a slender, like more sleek look for the various suit, I feel like Dread, to me at least, hits that balance bit better than other.
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah, definitely. I feel that but I feel that's also because they're going to two different angles, where the other end was trying to stay closer to, again, that original Super Metroid bulkiness, but in a more sleek fashion, rather than Dread, who was just doing its own thing.
Yeah,
So they have like the freedom. So I think it's just both armor. In my opinion, both armors achieve the same result going through different means.
a second last question. Is there anything you would change when it comes to Other M? Like,
Oh boy.
you pull out a list of like you pull.
Yeah. Let me. It's like that SpongeBob meme where pull out the list and it's never ending. Or Bugs Bunny, or there's too many cartoons that have done that. But
Yeah.
if I were to give the one thing that I would change, like if I had to dial it down to one, if I could travel back in time to when Other M was still in early development and I could change one thing, um, it would be the controllers. I feel that, yeah, the story is hit or miss, but I see it because of my perspective. I think it's also because of the way I see games is that story is more of like a bonus or a side thing, unless you're playing like a visual novel. Gameplay matters the most to me, because if it's not fun to play, then I can just look up the cutscenes online. If it's not fun to play, or if it's tedious, why stick with it for the cutscenes might be 8 hours long for this one video game, but the gameplay is going to be 24 hours. So what matters more really is the gameplay. That's the journey that the player will be taking, and the story is just like that icing on the cake. My reward for sticking with it and beating bosses or finding secrets and solving puzzles. So the main issue I think Other M has is really the fact that it's being controlled with a glorified NES controller.
Yeah.
The Wiimote on its side. Just
That was a
no,
no. Someone need to
no.
tell him like, like, so it's a
Yeah.
NES game of control. So it's like a 3D game that controls like an NES game. Yes, that's a stupid idea. You
I don't think that it's necessarily stupid. I just think that it's not fitting for what they were trying to do with Other M, which
yeah.
uh, plays more like, the combat feels more like a Team Ninja game, like Ninja Gaiden, or a hack and slash like Devil May Cry or Final Fantasy 16 or Bayonetta, or even Near Automata in some regards, where it's you're having a brawl, but you can also shoot lasers type of thing. And for that approach, I don't feel that having two buttons really serve it. And then by also limiting it to a 2D space, you can still make interesting level designs and stuff like that. If not, just look at any 2D Mario game.
Yeah.
But it's more of the fact that they're trying to force it into a 3D space, but perhaps not in the correct way or with the right amount of time and focus, especially with something like a Metroid game that it's usually about using your inventory to solve environmental puzzles. And in Other M, you can't really do that because you only have two buttons restricting it. So because your controller is already so restrictive, so has to be your level design. And I feel that if one of my earliest videos was about, when the Switch was announced, that they should give the Other M formula another go now that Nintendo is back to having a traditional standardized controller, if you may. where they can now use all those buttons to have Samus. Have those buttons be dedicated to different parts of Samus's arsenal. So, with one you can use the ice beam, the other you can use the wave beam, and then if you combine different attacks into a combo, or you can combine different abilities to solve environmental puzzles. And I feel that would have given it a little bit more of a fun approach to the game, and I think it would have made Other M a more well received title, because despite, I feel that, like, even if the story is kind of meh on the Metroid game, people are gonna stick with it if the gameplay is fun. And for that, you can just look at almost every other Metroid game that has a very bare bones surface level or store or non-existent story. It's mostly about the gameplay, because that's your mission to mission. So I don't think like that the having a D-pad and all that stuff, sure, it is stupid, but they didn't accommodate the level design for it. And for the type of level design that they wanted to go for it, I would have just make players connect a nunchuck, or uh, bundle a classic controller with a game, sort of like they did with GoldenEye on the Wii.
I guess with our final question, what do you think of the
Yep.
game now? And like, has your opinion changed over the past nearly decade? Like over decade?
I mean, not nearly decade. It's been over a
Yeah, been over a
decade.
decade. God damn it, past
14
me.
years. How's that? It's 14 years. Maybe if we did this during 2020, I would have understood it. I'm just pulling your leg now.
I know I'm upset past me. Like, come on, you could have written that better.
I think that my opinions on Other M haven't quite changed that much. I feel that I've just simmered or matured on my thoughts of why I like it and why I dislike it, and how I could go about fixing it without having to just start from scratch, aside from the controller issue, of course, because that would take starting from scratch. But I was always been a fan of Other M. I see it as its own thing, as it's trying its own thing, and I've always um taken Metroid Other M in the same light as, say, something like Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity today, where sure, it's tied to the original game, and there's all this other stuff, but you don't really need its context to enjoy anything in the series or in the timeline or games that come before or after it. So I feel that people who are harsh on Other M just are a little bit too obsessive, I guess. And I do understand that maybe some people just tried it and they're voicing their opinions, or there's people who still hate it. I'm not saying that people are wrong to say that stuff, but I feel that there's a lot of good potential and great ideas in Other M that I just, if anything, feel very sad that they were never really giving a second chance so far. And that perhaps it was, in a way, the amount of negative reception we gave the game that forced Nintendo into essentially going on Metroid hiatus. Because, uh, again, it's easy for a company like that to see, well, they didn't like this new idea that we were going with, but we also don't just want to make the same Metroid Prime game over and over and over again. So we were not going to make a Metroid game for a while, because we're just trying to figure out what to do and how to go with it. And that perhaps it was that general almost excessive criticism that made Nintendo scared of giving Sakamoto a team to even develop something like Metroid Samus Returns. Because I might be mistaken, but I heard that Sakamoto has been wanting to make that game for years before it came out, but Nintendo just refused to give him a developer team. And if there's a reason why someone like Sakamoto, who's been on a company for so many years, wouldn't be able to get a team to make another Metroid game, is because they're afraid that Sakamoto might make another Other M and stuff like that, and that fans wouldn't like it. So I kind of feel that we also have a part of the blame in that regard. Um, and that's not to say that if people dislike Other M, or if people hate it, that they're in the wrong, or that they're bad guys. It's not that. It's just that I feel that we should always take the bad with the good and the good with the bad, and try and see both sides of the coin. And for me, Other M, might not be my on my favorite Metroid games. It might not be the game I go to replay as much as, say, Metroid Prime or Metroid Fusion, but I feel that it's definitely has a very interesting placement within Metroid's pantheon of games, and even Nintendo's own games, where they were willing to try out all these new ideas with, give another developer the opportunity to develop a new Metroid game, and bring over the peoples of D Rockets who make cinematics, and people who worked on anime to work on the soundtrack and stuff like that. And if anything, I always just wish that this formula was giving another chance, so it can be sort of a spin off series, maybe not even centering around Samus. If tomorrow they wanted to do, I don't know, like the Gandrada spin off game, they could probably put the Other M combat style in it and give that another whirl, or make it space power related or something like that. I really like.
GF Marine
Yeah,
game, because that actually might be pretty fun.
yeah. I mean, I would, for the GF Marine game, I would rather see something like, I don't know, Star Wars Republic Commando.
I have not played that. I
eh,
should.
I really recommend it. It's one of my favorite shooters. And that's sort of what I wanted for terms of world building and gameplay approach for something like Federation Force, which of course I couldn't do on the 3DS, but you could probably do it on the Wii. But my point with Other M is, like, if there has to be a spin-off gameplay formula for Metroid that's not just pinball or something like that, I much rather have it be something like Other M than, say, another Warriors game or something along those lines, because I feel that there's a lot of potential, and that you can still fit what makes a Metroid game around it. And and it could also be another fun way to just expand the universe in different directions, and you already have a template gameplay to work from. You just need to uh, develop it with a proper controller in mind, so that the level design is, more concrete.
Yeah, with that format, there's some tweaks that need to be made for it to be up there with the 2D and Prime format. But if those changes
Yeah.
were made, it would be just as good as.
I think it'd be perfect for like a trifecta of Metroid games, where you have the 2D games, you have the Prime focus, but now you have the Other M approach fully realized, fully thought out and planned, where it could be in its own regards a hack and slash, beat 'em up type game, again like Nier Automata or Final Fantasy 16 or Bayonetta, but it's in the Metroid universe, and so you can implement more of the open world traveling from one place to another, like in Nier Automata, but which also has, different secrets and power ups you can collect in the world that reward you for exploration.
Yeah.
Heck, you can ask the team of the team at Platinum Studios to help you develop it. And yes, let Sakamoto back in the writer's chair. Just maybe give him another writer to help him out. I like to.
He doesn't.
I like to. Yeah.
I think when it came to that, he needed someone like, wait, hold up, wait a second, like, like, let's.
I mean, that's a whole different issue, but I also, that's in the past. I like to imagine that in these 14 years, the man has reflected on, learned from his mistakes. And so, it's worth giving him another chance.
Oh, yeah, of course. He one, like you said, like with your Prime, no, the Dread stream, like you said, like one mess up doesn't do everything else he's done. Like.
Yeah, it's exactly what I'm saying. I think that Sakamoto's already done enough to the point where after Other M, he didn't need to redeem himself for me, because he already gave me Super Metroid. He created the Metroidvania formula. He perfected it.
Mm-hmm.
He created a template that all these other games today have used as a basis. And then he's returned to his roots with Samus Returns and Dread, an area where he's more comfortable in. But I wouldn't be opposed to him trying out something else again, because it's the only way. As a creator myself, I would like to explore different avenues in my career rather than just staying within one um, style of gameplay or one approach to gameplay. And I feel that perhaps moving forward, we should be a little bit more cautious about um, the type of reception we give. Definitely criticize some things that need to be criticized. Definitely voice your opinions. But it's more in the sense that this is something that is functional. It's a game that works. It's a game that's polished. It's a game that and people kept putting it on the same degree as something like Sonic '06 or what have you that are just you know or half-assed and not finished or polished, and it could use definitely more years in the oven, and there's so many issues and it's kind of broken. It's just was so surprising to see that something as polished as Other M received such a reception. But what that says to me is how adamant the Metroid community is for polish and for um, perfection, that we have just a higher standard, and that just makes Metroid seem all the more prestige in my eyes, is that the community itself holds it in such a high standard where we just want nothing but the best for it.
Yeah. I mean that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's actually a really good way of thinking about it. That I never thought about it like that before.
I mean, I have to I've had to think about this for 14
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. To
And
be
I'll
fair.
continue. And I'll continue to think about it until the day where some other people show up and say Metroid Other M wasn't really that bad, guys, um, and other people come with that same perspective. But yeah, why else would someone as busy developing a game be involved with stuff like this if it's not for just raw passion and wanting to see the project all the way through?
Yeah.
Of course, the smart thing would have been like, all right, you're just still in the recording booth and you're talking in Japanese to your localization team, and they tell you and they do this all this stuff. But it was a different era, and it was 14 years ago.
Yeah. Jesus. Oh God.
My man just fumbled the ball, greatly once, but it, he still delivered a polished game.
Yeah. I mean, I think when playing, I counted slow down a couple times, though maybe that's just using a capture card. I don't know.
I've never really seen the slowdown. You might want to brush out your Wii. It might be overheating.
I was using a Wii U and it's
Same. There's a Wii inside of it. Remember?
inside every Wii U, use a Wii.
Quite literally.
Yeah.
That's why it's so long. But because I've been playing this game for 14 years, and it's always been 60 FPS in my end. So.
Thank you for this interview.
Oh,
I'm
not at
very
all.
grateful that
No
you said
need.
yes to this and all that.
I mean, I'm always happy to help. I'm always happy to lend a hand to anybody on their projects, no matter how big and small.
Yeah.
Because it's the only way us as creators can truly grow is just by trying out different projects and keeping ourselves busy.